Shut up and sit down.
The current state of politics is unsustainable, politically, economically.
You still have distrust there.
We all come from very different places.
Man, we don't want the government to do a damn thing.
You deserve better.
People have to have the information in front of them.
It is about supporting, platforming, and assisting the people who are out here actually doing the fight.
There you go. Just promote people who are doing something. Volunteer to work with people who you like. And
take an issue that's important to you and do something.
You are part of that declaration against tyranny.
This conversation gives me a little more hope for the future.
The one, the only.
Fight for liberty. This is the cherry on top.
Hello, fellow fighters. Welcome back to another episode of Fight for Liberty. I'm your host, David Fite, here to get you fired up about people making the world a freer place. And tonight we'll be talking about the dangers of CBDC, why we might need a bank run, and how to run an informative campaign. But first, a few words from our sponsors. First up, Crafton Business Services. They're our newest sponsor. I'm super excited about them. They are dedicated to helping entrepreneurs start, grow, and maintain their businesses by providing a wide variety of products and services to make your business more efficient, manageable, and profitable. And they really understand how frustrating getting your business off the ground can be, and that's why they've put together their business-in-a-box solutions to turn your idea or side hustle into a fully functioning company in one place for one transparent cost. So go on over to the website crafton.us, and if you go /start, that's the page about their business-in-a-box solutions. So go on over there if you are running a business that needs help in any of those areas. They're great guys over there. And secondly, for this episode, we are sponsored, as always, by Blood of Tyrants Wine. If you're looking for a nice night in while sipping the blood of your enemies and supporting the destruction of the tyrannical state, look no further than Blood of Tyrants Wine. A nice Cabernet distributed by activists you know and love. Bloodoftyrants.wine is the place to go. And if you use promo code F4L, you will get $5 off your first order. That is bloodoftyrants.wine, promo code F4L. But without further ado, joining me now, activist, economist, author of this book, I'm pointing in the wrong direction, The Final Countdown, former chairman of the Free State Project, and United States presidential candidate, Aaron Day. Welcome to the show. So I loved what you had to say last week in the presidential battle royale, and I think you got a little shortchanged and kind of ganged up on there towards the end, but I'm going to try to do my best to not carry that on with a little bit of devil's advocating tonight, but I'm really excited to get to know a little bit more of how your stances carry out. All right. So I always like to start off with kind of an intro testimonial question, but since I don't get a whole lot of you Free Staters on my show, I want to make it kind of specifically to that. How did you find out about and get involved with the Free State Project?
Listening to Free Talk Live, which is a syndicated radio show with Mark Edge and Ian Freeman, and I'd go to the gym and listen to that. I'm like, wow, this sounds pretty cool. And when the economy blew up in 2008, my wife and I were thinking about having kids, and we were at this point where we were looking at what was going on in Boston, knew that wasn't where we wanted to be, and then that just so intersected with my research on finding out about the Free State Project. So I moved in 2009. So I've been in New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project for 14 years.
Wow, nice. So you are a mover, not one of the New Hampshireites that kind of founded it.
No, mover.
I have had New Hampshire pretty high up on my list of states to live in for quite some time, even before I heard about the Free State Project. But I've visited it a couple too many times, and it is so goddamn cold up there. If I'm gonna move out of New York State, it's not gonna be to a colder state.
I mean, well, with global warming, who knows? Maybe it's going to get warmer. But it is true. The winters can be rough, but it is nice having 4 seasons. And once you get acclimated, you adjust and you adapt to it. And I think it's worth it to have a community of Liberty people here. I mean, it's amazing how many Liberty events are going on at any one point in time throughout the state. You can always find something to do and find people that are engaged in some sort of liberty activism or just pro-freedom activities, even if it's local marketplaces or whatever it happens to be. So I think it's worth it. But I mean, I agree. I lived in Florida for a while, and prior to moving to Massachusetts, and so I'm not a big cold weather fan as well. But when I balance it all out, it's worth it.
Fair enough. Yeah, when I first started considering New Hampshire, I was single, didn't have a family, wasn't even really considering a family anytime soon. And then, the more that becomes a prevalent part of my thought process and everything, it's like, I definitely don't want to raise a family in New York. That's pretty much completely out of the question. And there's not a whole lot of states that are more inviting to that atmosphere, especially to like knowing that there would be so many people like the Hughes and the Jeremy Kaufmans and plenty of other good people with good families that I could have my friends and my kids around. That would be great.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have 12-year-old twins. In fact, I was just tonight they had their 7th grade. I don't know if you call it a graduation, but but this is definitely a better place from an educational perspective. I mean, they go to a Montessori school, but there are a lot of educational choices around, whether it's private schools or homeschooling or whatever. The public schools are still the public schools. The public schools don't change. I mean, it's the same indoctrination from state to state, but there are a lot of options and a lot of choices here.
Yeah,
that's a huge factor.
Didn't the governor just sign like something like today or yesterday expanding the voucher program to make charter schools even more?
I believe so. I know that was something that's on the table. I don't know how much more broadly that was expanded, but yeah, no, there's definitely been a big push for school choice, and New Hampshire is one of the leading states on that for sure.
That's awesome. You love to see it. So let's start off with the book. Tell me about the process of getting all of this information down into pages.
Yeah, well, this was actually my first book, and it actually took me. So my goal was to write a 100-page book, and so it ended up being 260 pages, and it actually probably could have been twice as long as that. But this is an idea that I've been thinking about for a long time. I mean, I've been in crypto since 2012, and I actually was a political activist from 2012 to 2018, and then decided it's a waste of time. Politics is I mean, I ran for U.S. Senate. I ran a super PAC. I ran a number of political organizations, helped get over 100 candidates elected. I even had a digital printing press in my basement where we would actually print campaign materials. And I had people living in my house and coming in and out of the house to work on campaigns and all that other stuff, but just saw the futility of it. And then actually realized that crypto is the way to go. The separation of money and state is the way to go. And so I've been living solely off of crypto since 2019. But then the combination of COVID tyranny in 2020, and we're seeing this even today, the complete crackdown on crypto. I mean, there is a whole government strategy to take down crypto right now, whether it's the White House through their executive order, or the IRS, or the SEC, or the Treasury Department. It is a full court press, and we've just seen this week the SEC has sued the 2 largest exchanges, Binance and Coinbase.
Yep.
So I realized, well, while I saw crypto as a potential solution to this, the government views it as an existential threat. And in fact, there's a big centralized movement towards central bank digital currency. So instead of having a kind of a situation where you have more freedom and decentralization through cryptos like Bitcoin, the default path right now is we're going to have the 180 degrees of that, which is complete digital tyranny through central bank digital currencies, where everything will be tracked, everything will be surveilled, and we're talking about social credit scores and everything that basically are built off of a central bank digital currency. And the state of development of CBDCs is much faster than I thought. So I started writing this down, and the thing that was the most fascinating about writing the book is how much changed just within the last 90 days of writing the book. The hardest part about writing the book was deciding when I was going to stop making edits, because the amount of crackdowns, it was a combination of either the crackdowns on the government side or the collapse of fiat or the rapid pace of development of CBDCs, those three moving parts, every day there was a major development. And so that was like, that actually frightened me, because I've known this for a long time. I've known that the final step in all this is going to be a bank run versus CBDC, that was going to be the ultimate final last stand on this, because there is no political solution to stopping CBDC, because Congress exists based on their power of the purse and their monopoly control over printing money and their exclusive relationship with the Federal Reserve. There is no example in history of where a government has given up its power or control over money. So they are not going to be, as a group, eager, interested, or willing to really ban CBDCs or give up any of their control over money. So this I saw as something that maybe 1 to 3 years down the line we would be dealing with. As I started researching the development of CBDCs, I realized that we probably have less than 12 months. Like, I didn't realize there were 120 countries developing CBDCs. I didn't realize that you had a centralized kind of agenda here. And a lot of this stems from the United Nations and their 17 sustainable development goals, which can all be tied into a CBDC as kind of a control system. So if you're using too many carbon credits, then that will go against your score, and that affects how your CBDC works. And all of this is already baked in. So you actually have groups like the UN working with the World Economic Forum, working with the Bank for International Settlements and the World Bank and the IMF. They're drafting policies together. They're sharing policies and best practices. They're putting together toolkits. In fact, when you look at countries that have rolled out CBDCs like Nigeria, I actually was on the Twitter space with some folks from Nigeria, and they said, well, this rollout has been an absolute disaster. But their question to me was, why did we even do this? Why did the Nigerian government roll out CBDC? And the answer is they didn't. It was pushed on them by the IMF. The Nigerian government did not wake up and say, hey, it would be really beneficial for our people if we took the lead on developing CBDC. This was all of the technology, the strategy, the design came from the IMF and the World Bank. So there is a centralized element to this that even goes beyond American politics, because this is all moving towards one world government, one system, and the date on that is 2030. I mean, it's UN Agenda 2030. So they've been putting in place these big infrastructure pieces, and they've been doing trials. So a lot of people are quick to say, oh, China is the enemy. China's just the test case, right? The technology transfer, if you look at, I saw a map of Chinese surveillance technology and how it's being exported from China all over the world, including the United States. The United States gets half of its surveillance technology from China.
Yep.
The average American, I think there are something like 85 million surveillance cameras in the U.S. The average American has their picture taken like 60 to 75 times a day. In addition to whatever, we voluntarily post ourselves on social media. So, and half of that technology came from China. So while we're sitting here trying to make out like China's the enemy, there are people that have a globalist agenda that are pushing one agenda, one narrative, that are using these different countries as test cases all towards the goal of working towards one common system. And so I learned that researching the book. And so as I put together all the pieces, I'm like, wow, we really probably only have 12 months to stop this. And I started further looking at, it's kind of like the US. If you ask most people if they even knew what a CBDC was, if you ask them if they thought a CBDC was likely in the United States, most people would say, oh, that'll never happen here, right? Or that's 5 years off, or that technology is something in the distant future. They've already done 3 CBDC pilots in the United States. The Federal Reserve in Boston did a retail pilot, and they have developed a CBDC that does 1.7 million transactions per second. As an example, as a comparison, the current financial system does 150,000 transactions per second. So in other words, their CBDC is over 10 times greater in terms of capacity than what we already have. That technology is sitting on the shelf. The conclusion from their study was, well, we've worked out some of the technical stuff. There's some other details that need to be worked out, but it's primarily about figuring out the legality and how to market it to the public. What that screams to me is we're one emergency away from them rolling it out under emergency conditions. The technology is there. The technology works. So we're sitting here kind of oblivious to what's going on. And, one false flag or attack on the electrical grid or whatever, and then boom, all of a sudden they're going to usher this in, just like they ushered in all of the surveillance and the tyranny under COVID, which a lot of what was ushered in under COVID is actually related to the infrastructure for CBDC. There was a lot of surveillance. If you look at the contact tracing and all of the other stuff, and even a lot of the surveillance cameras, a lot of that came in under COVID. So they've actually added, a couple more steps to the infrastructure to make it that much easier to roll out CBDC when the time comes.
Yeah, and the scary part about a lot of this stuff is that it's logical to a point. Like, you said that it's 10 times as powerful as what we have now. That sounds like a selling point. You know what I mean? Like, that sounds like, oh, this is going to be stronger, more capable, more reliable. Even like you mentioned the contact tracing. In the early days of COVID, in my head, that was like probably the best method that we had to try to stop it, because, if you were... in my head, it allowed for the most amount of freedom for the people who hadn't come into contact with COVID, because as long as you hadn't, you were basically allowed to just live your life, was what they originally were pitching when they were talking about contact tracing. And so like a lot of the worst, most tyrannical, most like stepping stones to 1984 kind of things are the like really sneaky, really logical in the exact moment that they get rolled out. And like you said, they're basically just, they're developing it all ahead of time and then waiting for a time where something like that will sound logical, where they can pitch it with that like heartfelt, like we're saving lives with this, and people will just buy into it quickly.
Well, and I'm writing a second book, and the second book is actually tentatively titled Exiting the Matrix, and it really covers public health, public education, mainstream media, big tech censorship, and the fact that all of those are systems that, just like exiting banks is the way to stop CBDC, exiting these systems is the best way to... Don't fight them. You're not going to fight public school. I could go on, write a book about how, as much as I'm running for president now, I'm running for U.S. Senate, the most controversial and intense thing I've ever run for is school board. I mean, I actually had 1% of my town, like 250 people, actively engaged in a group to defame me and commit election fraud and everything else to stop me from getting elected to school board. It was the most bizarre thing that I've ever seen. But
nuts.
But we put a lot of effort into fighting these things, when in reality, if we just exit those systems and don't put our energy towards it, and instead move to different alternatives, then you can get a situation where just 3 to 5% participation, withdrawing from a system, is worth more than 50% plus one at the ballot box, or trying to actually reform something that is inherently not designed to do what it said it was supposed to do. And as you mentioned, the thing with contact tracing, well, part of this is, I would say, public health is a depopulation death cult. If you actually study the roots of public health, I mean, it's the eugenics movement, and they never really stopped being a centrally controlled eugenics movement. They just changed propaganda techniques. So even COVID itself was as we now know, funded by the United States in conjunction with a Chinese lab. Like the whole thing was actually kind of a setup to a large degree. But all the while, they make it look like, okay, once we get into this position of fear, now they're going to offer us a solution. And they're going to offer us a solution that, as you mentioned, it looks like it makes sense. This looks rational. This looks like it's going to add convenience. It looks like an appropriate implementation of technology. And in reality, it's just one step closer to complete digital tyranny. And that's really where we're at.
Yeah, and we've already seen a couple of, like the cyber attacks and things like that you were discussing that would be a logical stepping stone for CBDC. There's been major credit card systems crashing or credit card processor systems crashing for like days at a time, like sidelining the economy for a little bit, or at least portions of it, and scaring a bunch of people. They've kind of kept a lot of that under wraps. Like, it's not a prevailing news story ever, but if they ever wanted to make it one, yeah, something that was like, oh, this is a better system. It works 10 times as fast. It's got all of your stuff in one place. I know so many people who are even like liberty minded that would hop on that in a second.
Yeah, again, they pitch it as beneficial technology. Of course, when you dig under the hood of CBDCs, CBDC is not like Bitcoin. It's not a public ledger. It doesn't have any of the attributes of a decentralized cryptocurrency that actually make it secure and safe and distributed. That the actual technology behind it is it's a complete black box that has one or more entities that can seize and control what's going on. And actually, when I studied the pilot programs that the U.S. has done, there was this third one that I hadn't even heard of until I started digging into it, called the Regulatory Liability Network, which is basically they're trying to work on standards that can control interoperability amongst different CBDCs and for all digital assets. So what this basically means is they're trying to put in place like a framework where you could actually have multiple centralized entities seizing and controlling different transactions.
That's terrifying.
So it goes even beyond money. It goes to all digital assets. So imagine you buy an Apple computer, and your Apple computer is tokenized. There's a barcode, serial number, whatever associated with it. And all of a sudden the government doesn't like what they're doing. They can, this is all tracked. This is all tied to CBDC. They can shut off access to your computer. I mean, this is the level at which all digital assets could be tracked and centrally controlled. They've even designed in this regulatory liability network thing, they even talk about the application of basically tokenizing stocks, which is a good idea on one hand, because I've been actually involved with Ravencoin, and this is actually a really interesting idea if you did it in a decentralized manner. But what they're proposing is one where you would have a situation where the Federal Reserve and another group called the DTCC could both be involved in freezing the transfer of shares. So we're actually adding more centralization, more third parties in the middle. And yet, as they're rolling all of this out, this is all untested technology. So on the one hand, they might roll it out and say, well, CBDCs are going to be safer, but they're completely untested. I mean, yes, there's a 2-year pilot, but a 2-year pilot doesn't mean, 330 million people using it every day at scale as the only form of money that they have access to.
Yeah.
Something like Bitcoin has a 14-year history with stops and starts and issues along the way and things that have needed to be worked through. It hasn't been a perfect or seamless, but it's at least a resilient system that's decentralized, that's been tested. CBDC is completely centralized. So we could actually be putting ourselves at more risk technologically. Imagine if the entirety of the currency is hacked. So that could happen.
Yeah, and honestly, the honesty and the openness from the Bitcoin people, like the fact that you just said what you said, that it hasn't been perfect, it hasn't been seamless, there's some issues there. That's the kind of thing that doesn't get said by from the other side, and won't be said about CBDC when they're trying to roll it out. There won't be. And it'll be very similar to the vaccines. Whether or not even if you believe that almost the original thing about the vaccines, that it actually stops you from getting it and transmitting it, pretend that was true. There still should have been an allowance for some critique, and there wasn't, and there was absolutely no honesty and transparency, Where something like Bitcoin, something that's honestly drawn me to it and to the people advocating for it even before I joined the LP, was the fact that people were being completely open and honest about the fact that like it might crash, it might fuck up, this might not be the answer, maybe this is the MySpace, and like there's a Facebook of crypto that's gonna come along and actually be the thing that works well. You know, like people have been honest about that, and I think that's a real selling point.
Yeah, and I cover that in the book. I mean, I cover the fact that we have to exit banks and then move into self-custody crypto, gold, and silver. But I outline that there are risks and a whole bunch of considerations for each of these areas, for crypto, gold, and silver. There are a lot of considerations that you have to make, and I outline, at a high level how that works, and then I give specific concrete examples. But even in the case of, BTC can only do 7 transactions per second. So the current financial system can do 150,000. CBDC 1.7 million, BTC can do 7. And yes, if there's Lightning Network, but the truth is we've already witnessed with this latest NFT project that was launched on BTC that clogged up BTC and it clogged up Lightning Network. So you couldn't, get your funds off of Lightning Network because of the additional traffic. So it is not, BTC is not itself the solution at all. You have to look at, and this is why I say more broadly, proof of work cryptos, BTC, BCH, BSV, Ravencoin, Litecoin, maybe Monero, Zcash. I go through all the criteria and everything else of what can work. What can't work is anything that raised money, anything that did an ICO, anything that's proof of stake. All of these things are centralized and can be shut down. Ethereum is not a solution. Ethereum's transactions have already been demonstrated that they can be reversed, and it will be determined that it is a security. And because a majority of the nodes are in the United States, it could be shut down. It is not a viable alternative for money. Now, I'm for free markets. I think anybody should be able to experiment with whatever they want. But we are actually talking about, like, we're in a Game of Thrones type of situation here, where nation states are being threatened at their core regarding their ability to print currency. And so you need something that can be resilient enough to withstand. And I've yet to see a crypto project that has withstood lawsuits where there was a corporate entity and where, you could identify who the people were behind it. That has not worked yet, and that will not be viable in the near term. So I put that in the book as a consideration. And I actually think the crypto community, rather than fighting each other over this is the only coin, I think all proof of work coins that are decentralized should be promoting each other, because collectively they don't have enough capacity to replace the current banking system.
That's a good point.
So everybody should be increasing block size or increasing whatever they need to do to be able to get the transactions per second to be able to handle it. Because if the banking system collapsed tomorrow, I have PTSD from, like I said, I got into Bitcoin in 2012. And I remember in 2017, there was all this excitement, all this enthusiasm. People were using Bitcoin for transactions. Microsoft was accepting it. Expedia was accepting it. And then all of a sudden, because of the demand, it got clogged, and now you were looking at 3, 4, 5-day wait times to get your transaction cleared. The transaction costs went up to 50, 100. I can't even remember how high they got, but it was so high that basically any major retailer that was using Bitcoin had to discontinue it because it was too costly and not effective to be used as a currency. Well, that really hasn't changed. So if we got into a situation where, I use this as what I would predict, we get some false flag attack on the cyber grid, all of us or on the electrical grid, and then all of a sudden they try to usher in CBDC, we wouldn't really have a replacement.
Yeah.
Right. Because immediately would be clogged and immediately would be sitting here saying this isn't an answer. But proof of work coins have the ability to scale and to move to that level. And that's what I'm hoping people will start focusing on as they realize, especially after this week, that the government is doing a full attack on crypto on all fronts, and they want it dead. This isn't, there are a lot of naive people out there that think that the SEC is there to protect investors and that the SEC is there willing to wanting innovation and wanting to work with the crypto community to just make make quality projects that work within their framework, and that has nothing to do with the SEC's mission. The SEC is a revolving door of cronies, and it's there to protect the existing players on Wall Street. And if and there are a lot of, and I get frustrated with this because I'll see people who are like, oh, I'm going to raise $100 million and we're going to elect a bunch of people to Congress and we're going to stop this in 2024. First of all, we may already have CBDC before 2024. And two, no, you're not actually going to stop this in 2024 because you can't possibly win that many seats in Congress because the banks already own these seats. Your $100 million isn't going to make a dent. Your $100 million won't even take out one U.S. senator.
Right.
And so like you just there's a naivete to this that,
or at least not any of the senators that matter.
Yeah, not any of the senators matter, and not enough of them. I mean, again, you have to actually get majorities. This is kind of this whole thing about I love Ron Paul, but the whole movement, so what do we have? We have Thomas Massie and Rand Paul. It's made zero difference on anything. There's been zero improvement. Everything has gotten dramatically worse, and there is no momentum to get more people elected, right?
Yeah.
So, and by the way, at the rate we're going, maybe in 1,000 years, they might be able to take but we've lost so much in the meantime. We've lost so much just in the last 10 years that we will never get back because there's really not a historical precedent for government reversing itself. There's the historical precedent in the cycle is that eventually countries collapse, which is another chapter in the book that I focus on, which is explaining to people the history of fiat currency and that there have been thousands of attempts at fiat currency and not a single one has been successful.
Yeah.
There was a guy that wrote a book and he analyzed 775 fiat currencies, and his analysis shows that the average fiat currency only lasts for 27 years. They follow very predictable cycles. They collapse for very particular reasons. And if you look at the top 7 reasons they collapse, the US is hitting all 7.
Yep.
Right. I mean, inflation, corrupt government, war, competitive currencies, every single one of the 7. And what's tough is when you're talking to people about this, because for our entire lives, anybody that was born after 1920, which is almost everybody, the US dollar has been the global reserve currency, and people don't ever stop to think that it could be any other way. For most people, they've never considered, they don't know that it's been only since 1920. For most people, they've never, it's just always been this way. Yeah. But the average global reserve currency only lasts about 100 years. If you look back for the last 5 global reserve currencies. So the British pound was the global reserve currency before the US dollar, and it lasted for less than 100 years. And then before that, you had the French franc and, so on and so forth. So I outlined in the book all of these different factors where, CBDC is looming. It's right there on the horizon. But if you're honest about it, and if people are like, well, I just want things to go back to the way they were before COVID, history suggests there's probably a 0% chance that's going to happen. Yeah. And you should assume that the dollar is going to collapse. And in fact, what we see now is it used to be, I think, 79% of global transactions were made in 1980 using the dollar, and now that's dropped to 58%. You have the BRICS nations, which have decided that they're moving off the dollar. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, those countries plus 24 other nations have signed an agreement to collectively move off of the dollar. And if you look at the BRICS nations, it's estimated that by 2030, they're going to have a greater percentage of the global GDP than the West currently has. So everybody is already jumping ship from the dollar, and the dollar has already lost 98% of its buying power anyway.
Yeah.
Since the Federal Reserve. So there's 98. So when I say to somebody the dollar is collapsing, my question to them is, give me one counterexample, give me one historical precedent, give me one reason to suggest that it wouldn't collapse.
Yeah. Yeah, I think 5 years ago, the argument, I know you're running under the Republican Party, but liberty movement, like wider than the party kind of conversation here. The argument between the like kind of pragmatic and the radical sides of the movement, and the we can be careful and consistent and build up a bench and do the thing and eventually take over the government, versus the the exact opposite of that. It was a viable argument, I think, 3, 4, 5 years ago. But like you're saying, post-COVID, there is there is a 0% chance of the pragmatic approach working, or us having enough time to do that. If we had 10, 15 years, then yeah, maybe we could elect 50, 60 congressmen and at least 25 senators and be a big swing vote and be able to stop some of this stuff. We're not going to do it in 24, not even if all of the minor parties and both of the, good wings of the two major parties like all coalesce together to do something. It's not going to work in 1 year. And yeah, I think you're 100% right that, whether or not we have, 12 months, like you're saying, or maybe like 3 or 4 years, or 3 or 4 months, like that's up for question. But I don't think we can lay out a 30-year plan and right our wrongs. I just don't think that's a viable option anymore.
I don't think it is either. And I tried, by the way. So when I got involved in New Hampshire, and I've got a background in this. So my stepmother was the co-chair of the RNC nationally.
Damn.
And she was the ambassador to Costa Rica under Trump. I watched her for 30 years. I've seen Republican Party politics up close. And I'm telling you, this is an unwinnable position. And there are a lot of people in New Hampshire that look at this where they've got an idea of how this is going to work. There's been this strategy that has been all around. First of all, the assumption has been that New Hampshire politics works from the bottom up and it's grassroots, and that you should focus on the House. That's not how it works. It's completely top down. All of the major decisions and all of the major influence comes from Washington, D.C. And so there's kind of a disconnect between the way you want things to be and the way that they actually are. And the way things actually are. So this is, I'll give you, this is a little brief background as to what happened. So I got involved, and I was full, even in 2012, I was like, okay, we can basically build a liberty wing of the Republican Party. We can have the liberty folks take over the Republican Party, and we can right the ship, and we can stop some of this stuff. So I got involved in particular, long story, but I had a business destroyed by Obamacare. So I got involved to try to stop Obamacare Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire. And I formed a super PAC. We raised $300,000. My goal was to elect enough people to the state house so that we could elect a particular Speaker of the House, a guy who had been the Speaker of the House before, when we actually cut the budget by 11%. His name was Bill O'Brien. I raised the super PAC to get enough people elected to get him into power so that we could block Medicaid expansion, which, by the way, should be a key Republican issue. If you go back to 2012, if you go back to the town hall meetings and all of this stuff, all of the protests, the number one unifying issue for the Republican Party was opposition to Obamacare.
Yep.
So we got 86 people elected. We got however many we needed to get elected. There was a very contentious speaker's race. And then U.S. Senator from New Hampshire, Kelly Ayotte, got involved, along with Chris Sununu and his father, John H. Sununu, to endorse and promote a speaker for the New Hampshire House who would push Obamacare Medicaid expansion, because there are a lot of ties to the Senate. I'm not going into all the details in this. So a sitting U.S. Senator endorsed publicly in the state's Speaker of the House race. So what I said was this. And this is what I was trying to say to people in New Hampshire. And I've been trying to say this for a decade. This state runs from the top down. They were willing to implement Obamacare Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire to protect Kelly Ayotte's U.S. Senate seat. That's literally what that was all about. So what I said was, okay, if you do that, I will recruit a slate of candidates to run for independents, to run for the United States Senate. I'm not going to participate in your primary. I can't beat you in a primary.
Yep.
You have $100 million. But if it's that razor thin, I'll run as an independent, and I'll cost you that seat, and I will cost the Republicans control of the United States Senate. So if you want to mess with the state of New Hampshire, then this is what I'm going to do. They didn't believe I would do it. I did it. I recruited a full slate. I got 2.4% of the vote. This was a four-way race. There was a libertarian in the race as well. I ran as an independent. I got 17,000 votes. Kelly Ayotte lost by 1,700 votes. And it ended up costing the Republicans the United States Senate. It took 4 years, but had she won that race, then in 2020, the Republicans would have retained control of the United States Senate.
Mm-hmm.
So now, okay, great. I demonstrated that worked. What ended up happening? Well, the Republicans ended up getting complete majorities in New Hampshire. So this liberty dream of we've got the governor and the House and the executive council and everything. So now we're really going to be able to get stuff done. This is what we've been working for, right? We've been trying to work this internal process. They are now voting with complete Republican majorities to make Obamacare Medicaid expansion permanent. So this is why I throw up my hands and I say, okay, this does, and so why did that happen? Because the people were more interested about moving up their position and getting titles within the Republican structure and kowtowing to Sununu and working their way up, that they completely caved on principled positions that relate to the solvency and sovereignty of the state. 31.5% of New Hampshire's state budget now comes from the federal government.
Damn.
Right? This is not good. This has been a dramatic increase in the 14 years. So when I say that it's a lost cause to work through the existing system, I'm giving you some tangible experience and around this, where I don't see it happening, and we'll never regain what we've lost. And so then you have to sit back and say, what are we protecting anyway? We're not the freest nation in the world by any metric.
Yeah.
We're not even the leader in innovation. We're certainly not a leader in free speech. And we're not in education. We're not in healthcare. We are horrible on all these metrics. The only thing the supposed land of the free is number one in is incarceration rate. So I don't know. So from my perspective, I say, what are we saving? But not only that, we know that there are the people behind picking and selecting who gets elected, because let's face it, the party apparatus doesn't pick the best and brightest. This is why it's laughable when we see these people in Congress, right? They're selected because they're compliant, not because they're smart.
Mm-hmm.
They're selected because they will follow orders. And that's exactly what they do. They're just representatives of special interests. So we can't beat that system. We can't hack that system. But more importantly, the people that are selecting these people in this kind of rigged process, in terms of not rigged in terms of the voting is fraudulent necessarily, although there are instances of that. Just the structure itself, when you look at the gerrymandering and the funding and who gets in through the political machine and everything else, this is unwinnable. But understand the people behind that are pushing this globalist agenda, because the multinational companies that are part of the WEF are all looking for aggregating more power. Bank of America, JP Morgan, the military industrial complex, these people want more regulation and more control and more consolidation, and they want it on a global basis. And those are the people that are providing the funding of the candidates within the two-party system. Those are the companies that are funding the media that are pushing out the propaganda and the news and the censorship and everything else. So this is why when I sit down and I look at all this, I say, okay, we're out of time, but they are pushing a controlled demolition of this country, and they are pushing, and they want this one global government. They want this central bank digital currency social credit system. There's a controlled demolition, and it moves towards more globalization. So my point is, we need to stop that completely. Yeah. And we don't have time, because we already know their timetable on this is 2030. They put it in writing. Like, these aren't conspiracy theories. A lot of the stuff from my book, I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of sources in this book. And a lot of it is, this is from the UN itself. This is from the World Bank itself. These are their documents. These are quotes from their people. So yeah, it's a conspiracy, but it's not a theory. It's in black and white. Yeah. They're saying it. And they're so confident that they're going to be able to deliver this and that we're not going to be able to stop it, that they just put it out there, because it really, what are we going to do about it? And based on our compliance with things like COVID tyranny, they're right.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I think it's really important. Like, I really like hearing this from you, given what you're talking about with your background and your experience, and in the state that you have that background and experience in. Because, a lot of people, if I try to talk about how useless politics can be as a New Yorker, they say, well, yeah, of course for you, but like for me in Iowa or New Hampshire or Maine or something like that, for us, it's still viable. We can still do it. But I will ask, do you think that there is a legitimacy to the kind of pragmatic political approach within the state of New Hampshire for the purpose of, I guess, kind of like protecting and cushioning for the downfall? If you could get a mostly libertarian state of New Hampshire that could kind of see through that downfall better than the rest of the states, do you think that's still kind of a viable option?
I mean, so I'm torn on this, because on one hand, I whenever I do this, I come off as like I'm pessimistic, but I am a free stater, and I moved to New Hampshire and I remain in New Hampshire because I think it's our best shot. I'm torn on this because what bothers me, what I worry about the most, is the people that are now playing the game, right? So I look to find advantage to change the game. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, all right, I'm going to run an independent slate of candidates. I'm not going to play by the rules. I'm not going to run in the primary. This is how the system works. Let's hack this. My concern is that it's controlled from the top down, and the rules that are in place are here to basically prevent people from actually making any movement. And if the people that are in the liberty community become so transfixed on playing by the rules that there's no out of the box thinking, and that when the time comes, when things actually collapse, people are still trying to hang on to the Titanic when the Titanic is sinking. That is my number one concern. And that may be unfounded, but that is my concern now, because when I look at this legislative session in New Hampshire, is the worst in the 14 years I've been here, and it's with Republican majorities everywhere and a Republican free stater as the majority leader in the House. They're increasing spending by 18%. Wow. They're making Obamacare Medicaid expansion permanent. They failed to legalize pot. They didn't get a parental bill of rights. And yes, there are a long list of things that they'll talk about that they did that were successes, but most of the successes are preventing bad things from happening, which why would those bad things happen if you had complete majorities anyway? Mm-hmm. So those are more, I would call them Pyrrhic victories. And again, a lot of people like to market based on that. Oh, look, we stopped this bad gun law. We stopped it because there are 400 reps. So there are hundreds of bills that people put in every year. And of course, most of them don't pass, and most of them never make it anywhere. But it's become fashionable to take credit for something that never had a chance of happening anyway, just because somebody attached a bill number to it. Mm-hmm. So I'm controversial in talking about this. So that is my concern. It still is better that we have consolidation here, but we haven't been able to stop it materially. We haven't been able to stop what I consider to be the two biggest metrics, which are the solvency and sovereignty of the state. If we've given up more control of the state to the federal government, we're not winning. And I'm a big believer in, so my actual background is I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started my first company 30 years ago, and my belief on if you're running a startup is you have to have radical transparency. You have to be able to say, hey, this isn't working. Right? Because if you just sit there and you're lying to everybody and saying, oh, this is great, when in reality you're about to get run over, then you can't possibly, fix the situation that you're in, which is, partially why my campaign tagline is truth and transformation. You have to have truth before you can actually, have transformation. If everybody's sitting there lying to each other, if everybody's saying America's number one, we're the best, then you're not in a position where you're acknowledging reality, and you're not in a position where you can take actionable steps to actually make a difference. Yeah. So that was a long answer, but that's kind of where I'm at on it.
That makes sense. I liked your Titanic analogy, because I feel like a lot of the liberty movement is trying to patch the hole in the side of the Titanic instead of like getting people into lifeboats and getting the fuck off. And I feel like New Hampshire's kind of a lifeboat in that analogy. It's a place where you might still drown. Not everyone that made it to the lifeboats made it out alive from that situation. It might not work, but it's a hell of a lot better than staying on the sinking ship.
Well, again, I think it's beneficial to be here because you have high cryptocurrency adoption. You have a network of people that can trade with one another. Like if the shit really hits the fan, you actually have a community of people that can engage in voluntary trade and can work with one another, and still function. Plus, everybody here is armed. So this is truly it. As defeatist as sometimes I sound on this is the best place to be, but I don't think it's the best place to be because of the political strategy that has been implemented. I think that's the least attractive part of the liberty community in New Hampshire.
That's definitely fair. I think the crypto adoption is probably the main selling point in my mind, or probably second to just the basic community aspect. But it's funny you mentioned everyone's armed. I can definitely attest to that. I was knocking doors throughout the state for Tulsi Gabbard in 2019 and 2020, and I got greeted at the door with a gun at least half a dozen times in those 6 months that I was there. One time somebody was just sitting on they kind of lived on a hill, so you kind of had to go up the hill into the driveway, and then the house was up here. So he was on the back porch, but overlooking the driveway with a rifle, just kind of sitting on the top of the railing of the porch, and just calls out, people shoot trespassers around here, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, sorry, we're here for Tulsi Gabbard. And honestly, that was one of the coolest conversations I had door knocking on top of that, because he was a defense contractor, or actually not contractor. He worked for the Department of Defense. So he disagreed with Tulsi on her anti-war stance, but from a I agree with her somewhat, but she's misinformed here and there. And I know because I'm actually above her on that chain of information, and some of it's right, some of it's wrong. And we actually got to have a really nuanced conversation about a topic that's usually pretty just you either want to bring the troops home or you don't. And to have somebody say we need to bring about 3/4 of the troops home and then slowly phase out the rest of it was a really interesting conversation. New Hampshire was by far one of the best states I've worked in politically. I've knocked doors in 26 states in the last 4 years, and New Hampshire is definitely in my top 5 in literally every single metric.
Yep. Yeah. No. It's incredible in that regard. And again, whether it's homeschool community or a place to raise kids, or Second Amendment issues, or even being able to trade and organic farming and everything else. This is still the place to be. I just would, and this is odd coming from somebody who most of my time was spent on political activism. I have less confidence on the political activism side of it. And which is why, so you might see, well, why? Now, I've been a lifetime member of the Libertarian Party for 10 years. I'm a pretty hardcore libertarian. And you might ask, well, why am I running for president as Republican? And the answer is, if I can get 40,000 donors and poll at 1% or higher in 3 polls, I can get on a national debate stage in front of 80 million people and can talk about a bank run and can talk about some of the ideas that we've been discussing here. That's the number one reason why. If I'm elected president, am I going to be able to fix? I can't fix 99% of what people tell you they're going to fix. They haven't studied whether or not they even have that, whether that's even the role, whether they could do that if they wanted to. And then there's the practicality of, I need Congress for this.
Yep.
Well, no one, because of the gerrymandering and anything else, there's not going to be anyone who gets elected president with a supermajority of Congress. So no, I would love to abolish the Department of Education. I'd love to end the Fed and say I could do that as president. That's not actually possible. The only good thing that I could guarantee that you could do if you're president is you could pardon people. And that has some benefit to it. And I will say this, again, to me, the default strategy is the disintegration of the United States into global government and digital tyranny. That's the default state. And which we can stop through, I would say, radical noncompliance and or civil disobedience. I think that's the only way
Amen.
to actually stop that. But there is also the risk that if the wrong people, because this happens a lot in New Hampshire as well. People will say, I don't care about DC. Who cares? Screw DC, save New Hampshire. I don't vote for anybody in these presidential elections and everything else. It's like, okay, I didn't get the memo about where New Hampshire is immune from a mushroom cloud. I guess to the extent that 31.5% of our budget's coming from the federal government, I'm not understanding exactly how we are immune to what's going on. And now we could have been immune if we didn't continue to expand our relationship to the federal government, but we did. And so now, what do you think is really going to happen if we're like the second oldest state in the country in terms of age? So, how many people are going to be excited about, losing their Social Security and their Medicare? And based on what we saw, the COVID tyranny was pretty high. New Hampshire had a pretty high compliance rate with the vaccines and all the mandates. That was disappointing. To me,
which probably had something to do with that last statistic you mentioned, of just the average age there being so much higher. I think that there's a slightly logical correlation there based on that, but then there is also the extremely disappointing side of that. This kind of like beacon of hope wasn't that.
I wish there had been more resistance, and again we still had people stay-at-home orders. We still had businesses shut down. And again, this was with Republican majorities. So this kind of thing shouldn't have happened. And Sununu is largely to blame, but unfortunately, many of these liberty people in the House and in the Senate still support him and think that, well, if he wasn't there, things would have been worse. So I'm just kind of like, this is why it's difficult for me being a Republican, because part of what I would say is the least amount of freedom I've ever had in my life, and it's not even close, was 2020. And 2020 was all under Republican control. How do people answer that? And why are all the people running for president people that were part of that tyranny? Yep. And why are people okay with that, right? Like, at some point it's like, okay, now they're arguing over who was the least bad. I mean, it's kind of like saying, well, my concentration, I was a concentration camp guard, but I had the best personality. And, I it's an absurd criteria, but yet at the same time, you see voters like, well, DeSantis, did this and he didn't do this. And at least it wasn't mandatory. And it's just like, oh my God, I don't know I don't know how people forgot about how truly horrible and unnecessary and fabricated that entire situation was.
Yeah, the Jared Polis versus Ron DeSantis bickering that was going on Twitter last week or the week before was just entirely ridiculous. Because if you look at how they handled it, I mean, objectively, DeSantis is like 5% better. And DeSantis did a better job of righting the wrongs. That's the credit I'll give him, is that he did go through and pardon a bunch of people for COVID violations and stuff like that. I will give DeSantis credit for that one thing that he did, but he rolled out the lockdowns at the exact same speed as Polis did in Colorado and most other states did. It was just as severe. It was just, same with New Hampshire, same with Texas for the most part. Even a bunch of the bumfuck states had the same thing. The only real people that North and South Dakota were the only states that you could actually point to and say they did great. But in the same year, South Dakota sued to undo marijuana legalization. So I'm not a big fan of Kristi Noem either.
No, there are no actual good solutions here at all. And DeSantis reversed course after 82% of his population got vaccinated. And honestly, I've shared the videos. He was out there at every Walgreens and CVS doing photo ops and doing videos, telling people it's safe, telling people it's effective, and telling people they should do it. The amount of video footage, he was practically a vaccine salesman. And the truth is, and part of this is because I had a healthcare startup, and I've spoken at Harvard bioethics conferences. I've seen how public health works kind of from the inside. So when I say it's a depopulation death cult, it really is. Mm-hmm. And this is no more evident than when you look at the food pyramid. If you look at the obesity epidemic and the increase in diabetes, this is not because people became lazy. People actually somewhat complied with health guidelines. And those health guidelines were dead wrong, and no one got fired. Like they have been absolutely destroying the food and the nutrition, and it's been deliberate, because there truly is a motivation for depopulation. So if you know that, so for instance, as far as I know, I might be the only unvaccinated candidate running. I'm not even sure RFK, as much as RFK talks about his issues, he is a class action lawyer who has been targeting Merck and other companies on vaccines. He and his wife were having a party during COVID, and they were demanding that either you be vaccinated or have certain testing or whatever. I'm not certain whether or not he's vaxxed. And in fact, at PorkFest, I very well might ask him that.
Yeah.
Because if he's vaxxed,
is he?
What?
Do you know about Vivek?
Vivek is a complete scam. Vivek pushed vaccines. It's on his Twitter. He went out, pushed vaccines. He congratulated Biden. He worked on promoting vaccines in Ohio. And get this, his company tried to get a contract to actually centralize a national database of information about people that had been tested for COVID. He is a complete scam. It drives me nuts that he has any traction within the liberty community whatsoever. Now, he might not have gotten vaccinated, but he promoted it, and his business, biotech business, tried to make money off of it. And by the way, his biotech business, his quote American dream, is taking money from the same investor that backed WeWork, buying other people's, technology for pharmaceuticals, and then basically just taking it through the FDA approval process. This is not exactly the American dream. That's cronyism.
Yep.
So I actually think Vivek is a nightmare on a whole variety of levels. And I can't believe, but there's a commonality in his approach, right? His approach right now is he's raising money from other people to then invest in companies that he claims are woke, so that he can buy enough of a stake and then use, his ownership in a combination with his legal talent to change the structure of the company. It's like, hey, dude, how about you start your own company instead of using other people's money in the law to interfere with existing companies? Like the whole aspect of this guy bothers me. But nevertheless,
you guys are debating at PorkFest, right?
No, I keep on saying that. He has not. So if you see Vivek, he's always posting about, I debate anyone, anytime. I will go anywhere and debate. And so I just said, well, that just means that he must be willing to debate me, because we're going to be at the same place at the same time. And he never turns down a debate because he's courageous. Oh, he'll go on NBC. So no, he hasn't accepted, but at some point, I'm going to confront him on it.
Yeah.
Because, but again, and he's one where his stuff may sound good, although bombing Mexican cartels, banning TikTok, adding a 25th Amendment, like I think that he's probably stepped in it in a material way in the last 6 weeks that would be offensive to certainly libertarian people. It might appeal to a certain segment of hardcore conservatives, but yeah.
I really wish he had the bomb the cartels take before he went on Michael Malice, so they could have talked about that. That would have made it a much more interesting interview, because that was honestly a great interview. He came off really good on that episode, and I was like, I disagree with some of what he had to say, and I really disagree with him making the culture war such a prominent piece of his campaign, because I think for an anti-establishment candidate like him and RFK and some of these other people are pretending to be, for any of those candidates to actually be successful, they need a unifying campaign. They can't be cutting people out and alienating people from the get-go. And regardless of how you feel about it, that includes welcoming the LGBT community into a somewhat, you need the LGBT and the pro-gun community to come together on something. That's, at the end of the day, if you don't have both of those votes, you're screwed. And that's why I don't think RFK or Vivek have a shot in hell of doing anything.
No, they don't. And again, I think Vivek has controlled opposition. And this is why it's kind of my point on this is, again, I think the U.S. is already in a massive state of collapse. It's going to fall forward into this centralized tyranny, and that we need radical mass noncompliance. And by mass, I mean it probably only takes 3% to stop from going into that level of tyranny. And running for president and potentially getting on the debate stage is the way to stop that. None of what Vivek says he's going to do, he's going to be able to do. And most of what RFK says he's going to do, he's not going to be able to do either. And look, I liked RFK's book. I read his book and I watched his movie about Anthony Fauci. It's just that when I dig into it a little bit more, again, I'm not convinced that he himself isn't vaxxed. And then I also, when I listened to his Twitter space with Elon Musk, he says things that remind me of what he wrote about in his book, which is that he still is all about protecting FDR's programs. And he is still, at the end of the day, a hardcore Democrat. And he still believes that in this paternalism. And he was talking to Elon Musk about how AI is potentially a threat. And in one area, he mentioned that, self-driving cars could put Uber drivers out of jobs, and that is one of many reasons AI needs to be regulated. That's absurd. I mean,
I like that Elon didn't really take kindly to that. He pushed back pretty hard and pretty quick. I was still in the room when that part came up.
He did, but so there are several things. So I appreciate that he's bringing awareness to this issue. And I appreciate that he's talking about the deep state, but he still seems to think that more laws are going to be the way, and more that somehow he's going to clean up government and more laws are going to solve it. And I'm sorry, that's false.
Yep.
There's no evidence that that's the arc in the direction that things are going. And so, he'll be at PorcFest as well. And that's going to be interesting. And I'm sure that's going to be quite a draw. But again, to me, it's kind of like we were talking about with New Hampshire politics. We need to be focusing on Plan B now. We need to be focusing on how do we get people to stop putting their attention on these impossible, pragmatic political solutions, realizing that we've gone from the country that, created a written form of government that limited its government to one where the only thing we're number one in is incarceration rate. That's how far this has fallen. You don't reverse, you don't come back from that. So knowing that that's what we've done, how do we get people to start exiting these failed systems? And then, because right now this is just a staving off moving into digital centralized tyranny. Then we have to talk about, at some point, from first principles, what governance should look like. We're not ready to have that conversation yet, because we need to stop this incredibly bad thing from happening. This thing that if it's implemented, we literally lose free will. Because once CBDC's in and social credit scores, I didn't realize until probably 9 months ago how bad China was in terms of their social credit scores.
Yeah. That stuff's mind-boggling.
It is 200 million security cameras, and they monitor everything that you do. If you don't visit your elderly parents enough, you get points taken away. You play video games too much, or you cheat at video games. Like I have this in the book. I have a table from one of the provinces in China of what exactly the activities are and their effect on your social credit score. And there are like 23 million people that are already on the blacklist in China that have restricted access to healthcare, transportation, housing already, and they haven't even rolled the system out nationwide. And by the end of this year, 1 billion people in China, actually the entire country, will be on CBDC by the end of this year. 261 million people are already on CBDC in China.
Wow.
So this is another one of those things. I point this out, and then, but what I have to learn how to explain is, well, people will say, well, that's China, that would never happen here. And what they don't realize, it's kind of like the light bulb needs to go off that the United States funded the lab where COVID was developed with China. Once you understand that that actually happened, this isn't an ideological separation. There's something else going on here with respect to how public health and these global organizations are working with China that is not one about they're ideologically over here and we're way over here. That's not what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, we're not fighting them anymore. We're racing them. We're doing a space race with China on like who can be more tyrannical first. And I mean, China's winning, sure, but like we're not. It's not like we're doing the opposite. We're just coming along beside them or a little bit behind them.
Yeah, but the intent is there. And of course, in the 1960s, China had no technology. China was a dirt poor country with no technology. The game plan for them to even enhance and increase their technological capabilities and develop this technocratic communistic form of government was all infused from Nixon people and CFR and some of these other organizations. So we exported that know-how to China. China became the test case and has developed it, and now it's being diffused back to the United States and to other countries. Yeah. But it's here much faster than people think. And if I'm off, then maybe I'm off on timing. But I actually at this point don't think I'm off on timing, which is why if we don't stop this now, look, the Fed now is going into place in July. So the Fed now is basically a instant payment platform for the banking system in the United States. So right now, when you send a check or you do a wire or an ACH, it can take 3 days, 7 days, whatever it is, a lot of fees. You're going to have basically instantaneous transactions between banks. That's going to cost a fraction of a penny. That will be live in July. That's not a CBDC, but that is an infrastructure on top of which a CBDC could be implemented. And in fact, the people that even have been working on the CBDC pilots, which I have in the book, have been quoted as saying Fed now could be the infrastructure by which CBDCs are rolled out. So, I mean, we're talking about 3 weeks. Yeah. In 3 weeks, that will be live. Yep. So, I mean,
it's going to be a game changer for sure. So my day job is in basically that space. I work with small business finance and have on and off throughout since like 2017, 2018. And so like I've known that this was coming since they started talking about it like a few years back, and most of my friends and coworkers were excited about it. You know, this is something that in theory is going to drastically drop operating costs for most financial companies, make transactions significantly faster, make them easier, put them all in one place so that we're not having to worry about like compatibility between our ACH programs and different bank accounts and all this other stuff. But something that, I've made a mission pretty much since I got into this, and especially since I got to a place in various companies where I had any kind of say or influence in these decisions. But, I resell credit card processing systems currently. And the like first thing that I talked to my business partner about was like, we have to make sure that it's one that can accept at least the major cryptocurrencies. Because because we don't have to sell people on cryptocurrency when we're signing people up on this. We just have to sell them on us, on using our service, the same way that we would have if we weren't offering this. But what we're doing is we can make a larger margin of like cryptocurrency acceptance throughout the country amongst normies and boomers and Gen Xers who don't even care about it, kind of stealthily. And there's a lot of ways like that we can do the stuff that you're talking about, where we're maybe not a bank run specifically, but something a little bit slower than that, where at least we're allowing people to be able to run fully off of crypto with their lives if they so choose.
That's hugely important. I mean, getting point of sale systems is a major pain point. Like that is a difficulty for merchant adoption. So what you're talking about, I mean, if that's what you're doing, if you're bundling a payment solutions that include fiat and crypto, that's huge, because that has been probably one of the biggest pain points. But of course, the issue is that if you're offering both and then the government all of a sudden decides that it's illegal to offer crypto, then you're going to have people that are offering payment processing solutions are going to stop offering the crypto, right? That's just so that's the hard part, is how do you roll out, point of sale and solutions, but make it somewhat, because we are going to be at that point where people are going to have to say, I'm not going to follow the law. Right? Like at some point we're going to get to that point when if they come to confiscate crypto like they confiscated gold in the 1930s, we need the ability to say, no, I'm not going to do that, which is why what I promote is self-custody with whatever the alternative solution is. But you're right, the bank run is only one part of it. The bank run is just simply, it's not just get your money out of the bank, but get your money out of the bank and get it into these alternatives. And then once you're in these alternatives, start to using it. And what you're talking about is a critical part of this is the actual usage of it, because it doesn't matter if people are sitting on Bitcoin or sitting on gold if nobody can use it for day-to-day exchange. And so all of that, but we have to, but if what I'm saying is true, if we're looking at potentially less than 12 months for CBDC, and we have to be able to do 150,000 transactions per second to meet the current financial system, and then we need to enable merchants to be able to actually engage in commerce, there's a lot of work to be done there and a lot of opportunity as well. But I don't get the sense that there's the urgency. I'm trying to convey urgency. And I get frustrated on Twitter when I'm like, people are like, oh, or my meme coin's going to go back up again, or what does this mean? Oh, Coinbase, does this mean the stock for Coinbase is going to go down? And I'm like, wait, this is about a fight for decentralized money or global tyranny, and you're worried about the stock price of a centralized exchange that the government is absolutely going to do everything in their power to take down. Right? There's just a diversion of focus, and that's really been a source of frustration, because there's a lot. Making the bank run work requires a lot of focus and a lot of participants and a lot of people to kind of join in on various aspects of it. It's not just pull your money out. It's certainly not put your money in the mattress or hold on to cash. It's because that's not the key point of it. The key point of it is exchanging fiat for alternatives. Because if you're just holding on to fiat, you're not fixing the problem.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think, you mentioned like, eventually most merchants are probably going to have to choose either crypto or CBDC/fiat. And I think the key to winning that exchange is if they look at their bank accounts and 51% or more of their income is coming from the crypto side than the other side, they will most likely choose that one. So, the more that we can use crypto even in those places that accept both, and maybe it's a little bit of an inconvenience for us, if we're showing these merchants that we would rather buy their products with crypto than with a dollar, they're going to be a lot more likely to actually take our side in that split when it becomes inevitable. But I want to go back to something you mentioned way earlier about writing the book and kind of get your take about, you mentioned that you had a problem deciding where to end it because so much was happening. And I've heard a couple of theories that this is kind of intentional, that this has been the like ramp up of the news cycle over the last decade or so is to make it basically impossible for people like you to be successful, where you don't have enough time to actually break through to people because they're so inundated with everything else and everything keeps updating and changing, and they're passing BS laws to just kind of change things a little bit here and there just to make your numbers inaccurate. And you don't have the time to actually, write a full book, publish it, and have it still be accurate by the time it hits the shelves.
Well, that's part of the subject of my next book on exiting the matrix. Is I actually am going through kind of the history of propaganda and the techniques that are used, and how, starting with Ed Bernays and even how this entire field of propaganda came about, what its intent was, what its motivations are, all the way through to today, and what the tactics are. Because you're absolutely right, that is what they're trying to do. I mean, and at this point, it's now, I wouldn't say, I don't know how widely known it is, but the CIA, the FBI, and others have had direct plants in mainstream media for decades. I mean, the Church Committee showed that in the 70s. We now know from the Twitter files what the involvement is with big tech and censorship. So literally, I cut my cable, I don't know, 9 years ago or whatever. So I don't even watch Fox News or CNN or any of that other stuff, but it's all I think even RFK just said 75% of the advertising for mainstream media news comes from big pharma.
Yep.
Or you'll have like Lockheed Martin or why are defense contractors sponsoring news? Because it's not like as a consumer, I'm buying a product from Lockheed Martin. I'm not, but yet they're a major sponsor of the news. It's absurd.
I would love to be a customer of Lockheed Martin, but I'm not allowed to be.
Exactly. So this is the challenge, which is why, yes, I'm saying get your money out of the banks, switch to these alternatives. The other thing I'm going to say is turn off all mainstream media and move off of the big tech censorship platforms. And like, it's critical to do that because again, we could do a whole separate episode on this, but so much of what happens, like from the time you're born to 7 years old, you have no conscious filtering of information that comes in. Your brain is operating at an alpha brain state, like literally. This is why people have this is why kids can't differentiate between imagination and reality, because literally their brain waves are operating at a different level. So what goes into your subconscious before you're 7, like those become beliefs that you just subconsciously have. So if your parents tell you you're never going to amount to anything, or they implant all of this stuff, that becomes ingrained because you never had an ability to filter it. Now you can rewire it subsequently, but when you're watching news, like particularly if you're watching it early in the morning before you're awake or right before you go to bed, your body, your brain waves are move from beta to that same alpha state. So you're actually losing your ability to consciously filter what information is coming in, which is why a lot of, or something you may never have never thought of before, just slipped into your subconscious because you weren't paying attention and you didn't filter it.
Yeah.
So as long as there's continual brainwashing by people watching the media, it's going to be pretty hard for people to unplug and move in a different direction because they're continuing to agree to be controlled on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And we're there, I've heard the arguments that, basically a similar argument to the like pragmatic electoralism in the media of like, well, there's there's Tucker Carlson who's speaking truth and blah, blah, blah. And well, he just got fucking fired for that, and I don't even think he was that great. And he still got fired. The first time in the since, because, I've never purchased cable since I moved out of my parents' house. It's just never been a viable expense for me to pay for TV. The only time I really regret that is during sports seasons. But I just go to a bar and watch it and it's fine. So the first time I've really regretted that since was not being able to watch the last episode of Kennedy, because I wanted to watch that live. But she's another good example of, somebody that was an extremely awesome, viable person that was in the kind of mainstream media. It's Fox Business, not Fox News, but up there, and she just got canned too. So we're seeing a radical centralization within these already super corrupt and centralized news organizations, the same organizations that were in Operation Paperclip that you mentioned earlier. They're getting even more hardcore into this, and it's becoming, just an impossible epidemic. When I talk to like my grandparents or my friends' grandparents that are like avid Fox News or CNN watchers, it's amazing just the kind of the complete lies that come out of their mouth when they talk to me that they fully believe is fact because they think that Sean Hannity can do no wrong, and it's baffling.
Yeah, no, so that is hard to break. So yeah, it is a challenge. But I will say the rate at which crypto is being attacked while simultaneously the banking system is collapsing and there's development on CBDC, that has just picked up on all three fronts just since I started writing this book. Like it has been, again, I've been actually talking about a bank run. You can find it on Twitter for 3 or 4 years. I can't even remember the first time I said this all will come down to CBDC versus a bank run was probably 3 years ago, but I didn't actually start promoting it or writing a book about it until this year when I realized that there's less time than I thought, right? Because did I think a lot of people are going to preventatively get ahead of a bank run? No, I mean, that's realistically not how people work. But now, once Silicon Valley Bank happened, and now Gallup did a poll, and 48% of Americans are actually concerned about the safety of their bank deposits. Well, okay, we now have So in terms of me getting my message out to people, half the country's already worried about their bank account anyway. Yeah. So now I've got somewhat of a captive audience. The question is, how do I get to that captive audience? Because the truth is, I've been completely shadow banned everywhere. I can't even use Facebook anymore. Last year I was in Facebook jail for 140 days, and I'll jump in there, and then I'll get punished for something that I posted 8 years ago. Like, it's completely arbitrary. I'll just get these notices now about content that was almost a decade old. So I can't rely on this as a distribution point, because a lot of the stuff that I was saying was about COVID, which all turned out to be true. 100% of it turned out to be true, but they never retroactively go back and say, gee, we apologize for this, we're going to lift the shadow ban. That never happens, right? So this account where I was generating a couple of million impressions a month, now it's like nothing, so I don't even use it. Twitter was horrible until Elon Musk, in the last 90 days. I had been shadow banned, and my account was blocked from, I couldn't buy ads. I couldn't set up, even qualify for the professional program. No one would tell me why. I didn't have any like explicit things. And so I even did a series of videos on that in 2020, where I was suggesting to people decentralized alternatives for everything from YouTube to, use Signal and use this, and this, going through a whole laundry list of that. So it's been frustrating. That is my biggest challenge. That's part of why I'm running for president, is, okay, I like, this message has to get out. How do I do it? And that's a platform to get this out. But I think it's that urgent. Again, I think we are talking about a very near, and more importantly, even if it's a longer time frame for this to get rolled out, that we don't benefit by waiting. They benefit. The more time there is, the more infrastructure they get in place. Now FedNow's in, now CBDC's moved. Now they've seen what happened in Nigeria. Now they've seen what happened with the rollout in China. Now they're tweaking, right? Now they're learning. And so that when it comes to rolling it out here, we don't have the advantage of time. Moving quickly is the only advantage we have. So now the question is, how do you get enough people awake on this and to take action? And again, the banking system, we're not backed by gold. We used to have 10% reserve requirements. We got rid of the 10% reserve requirements. So you may have a bank that only has 5% of customers' funds held in deposits. And that 5% is often held in long-term treasuries, which are at a lower interest rate because of how much the Fed has jacked up rates. So if they have to sell because customers want to get their money out of the bank, they're taking an additional hit off of that. So what I'm suggesting is, this is why when I say 3%, 3% could crush a bank. 3% of people taking their money out could crush a bank. That's how fragile the U.S. banking system is. That is how much of a Ponzi fiat currency is. And literally at no point have we ever been this highly leveraged, with this much debt, with this little in customer deposits, all at the same time, while foreign countries like Brazil, Russia, India, and China are moving away from the dollar. So it is a perfect storm. And I will say this, I don't think I'm necessarily going to cause the bank run. The bank run is going to happen whether I'm promoting it or not, based on just outflows and interest rates, right? That's going to be the primary motivator. The difference is, have we given them enough time to put in place their CBDC alternatives, or do we actually stop that and we retain control over how this works moving forward? Because if they get CBDC implemented, then if we thought COVID tyranny was bad, how many of your friends and family you think are going to resist the next time they try something like this if they have complete and total control over their bank account?
Yep. Well, so let's get into a little bit of the controversial side of the bank run, because you're talking about the 3%, and that's a codified statistic throughout. BLM uses the exact same number, right? With just active non-compliance. And what do we do with the other 97%? How do they fare in a situation like that?
Well, so again, my point on this is going to collapse anyway, right? My point is, this collapses and goes to CBDC no matter what. So the question is, do we do nothing about it, or do we do something? So in other words, there's not a situation where we do nothing and things remain great for everybody. Things go to zero for everybody, things go to tyranny. Some people may be happy with the tyranny, right? Some people may be okay with this centralization and giving up their free will, but that is the default path. 3% is what you need to make it happen. It doesn't mean it needs to stop at 3%, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying we stop at 3%. I'm just saying practically, if we want to talk about how to roll this out, the marketing strategy here isn't to 100% of people. You only have so many resources. You have to have a focused strategy on getting people on board. We need early adopters. Now, once you get early adopters, good. The early adopters can then get the next wave of people in. I hope everybody participates in this, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of what this needs to be effective and what this needs to be to actually halt what's going on, we need 3% to start. But again, I would hope as many people as possible jump on as quickly as possible. And it's into crypto, gold, and silver. I'm not trying to shill any particular coin. And in the book, I go through all of the risk factors of proof of work crypto. I go through because gold and silver have their own set of issues and challenges, and these markets are fraudulent. And like, how do you even trust what you're buying? And, I really place a lot of emphasis on people don't like self-custody, right? The hundreds of people I've gotten into crypto, half of them, I told everybody, take your money off of exchanges. And I'd say half of them have lost their money because they left it on exchanges that have collapsed, because almost every exchange has collapsed. Like historically, it's not a good record, whether it was Mt. Gox, FTX, Quadriga, all big exchanges. The big ones fail, and the small ones fail too. People just don't hear about it that much. But
the MTG exchange lasted longer than most of the other early ones.
Yeah, exactly. But in the end, right? Binance and Coinbase are not safe. And I've gotten a lot of flack for this. I've been saying Binance is not safe for 3 years.
Yep.
Even though they've innovated in a lot of things, I still tell people, don't put your coins there. You use it if you have to use it to get your coins, but then get your coins off. It's not safe. Like this cult worship mentality that happens. It happened with Sam Bankman-Fried. It's like, when are you going to get it that 99% of what Binance lists is going to be deemed an illegal security. What's left isn't enough in terms of trading volume to make a business. So this is not going to be sound just based on logic, right? This isn't a long-term viable situation. This doesn't even mention whether or not they're commingling funds, committing fraud, doing things with stable coins, which it turns out most of them are doing. I mean, I can't say, as much as I'm all for free markets, the crypto community has certainly done a great job of it's almost like people aren't aware that there's a business model other than a Ponzi scheme, right? Like, for whatever reason, we've got all this new innovative technology, and all anybody does is, here's a number go up coin, and there's no underlying value proposition to the project other than it doesn't do anything. The tokens don't do anything. It's just speculation for speculation's sake, and people should be allowed to do that. People should be allowed to gamble, right? That shouldn't be illegal, but that certainly isn't an innovation. And by the way, it always ends up going in the same direction. So I don't know if I answered your question, other than to say, I don't know what we do about the other, how do we make people aware? I was on a call on Sunday with a group of people that are, I'd say a very conservative group, We the People group. And they've been trying the pragmatic Republican approach as well. And, when I was on there, and at the end, it was like, they're almost in tears because I just painted the situation that I've described with you. And if you haven't heard this before, this doesn't sound like great news, right? Well, yeah, they're going to do this. They've implemented this. We're running out of time. And then everybody's kind of freaking out.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this wasn't a technologically savvy group of people. They're not sophisticated from a crypto perspective or anything else, but they understand at a gut level that everything is falling apart, and they are actively looking for, maybe it's just a New Hampshire thing again, but they're already looking for forming community groups, what happens in case of emergency. How do you find a network of people that can work, basically on a volunteer basis to handle different aspects of what you might need from an economics perspective. And so I want the word to get out there, but the truth is the default is collapse. So we get as many people out as we can, but we're not going to be able to get everybody out right away.
Yeah. Do you think there's a possible timeline where the bank run takes long enough to fully collapse the system that people can join it and, you know, mostly move on it? Obviously, you know, it's the economic system of the United States collapsing is going to end up in tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of deaths. Like, that's just kind of an inevitable situation, whether like you're saying, whether we do it or it just happens naturally. It's not going to work out super great for everybody. But do you think that there's a way for it to happen, even if it's just within a couple of weeks, where people are able to pull their money out, get it into something else, and still kind of maintain some semblance of society?
I mean, again, it's hard to predict how all this works. I think it's possible, but what I said earlier is probably one of the biggest problems that we have is that crypto is not ready. We're not ready for the collapse. We're not at 150,000 transactions per second. So I'm saying is this is going to collapse, whether we cause it to collapse or not. It's going to collapse. We actually probably want to help be a catalyst to the extent that it means some of us are starting to work ahead of time on building out the other infrastructure. Yeah. So to answer your question is, it depends on how quickly and can we get our shit together as a community to scale, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can scale, and you know, people hate and this is a challenge for me, right? I learned about BTC in 2012. I learned about Roger Ver was somebody who was very early. Roger Ver learned about BTC from the Free Talk Live guys, Mark Edge and Ian Freeman. That's where Roger learned about BTC. Then he became Bitcoin Jesus. Then he started BCH. Then BCH split off to BSV. And I'm going to tell you, I like all of them, right? Everybody wants to join a group. I think that Roger Ver has possibly done more to spread the mass adoption of Bitcoin than anyone. And when you watch his speeches about it, and when he does debates, it's very clear he wants peer-to-peer cash for the world, for everyone, including and especially poor people, that this is not an elitist project where, you know, people are cheering, you know, $40 Bitcoin fees, and Roger's saying this should be a fraction of a penny. This should be something that enables freedom and peer-to-peer exchange everywhere in the world. And that's where you've gotten BCH. And then BSV has the highest capacity. BSV can do 50,000 transactions per second right now. Damn. And it's moving to 1 million transactions per second. People don't like Craig Wright because Craig Wright is suing everybody. And now it's turned into this, is he Satoshi and everything else? I've looked into this. It's like, what I will say is, if he's not Satoshi, it's pretty bizarre that he knows how to make Bitcoin scale to be able to actually handle transactions as per the white paper at scale, and to be able to do microtransactions. So what I'm saying is we need BSV, BCH, Litecoin, Ravencoin, Bitcoin. We need all of it, and we need all of them to scale up. Mm-hmm. Now, and we need it to happen now, because if the banking system collapses and we have people that aren't sophisticated trying to jump in to use these other things, and it's $40 fees and it takes 7 days to use, it's lost again. It's going to be a repeat of 2017. So I believe there's an infinite number of possibilities. We live in a quantum universe. Anything is possible. But if we're going to be successful, it's going to require people placing some attention and energy on actually scaling P2P cash.
All right, so
Yep.
Sorry, I'll let you finish that point, because I was going to go way off.
Well, so I mean, so that was pretty much the end of the point. So so there's a lot that needs to happen. And again, my fear on this, and my fear was magnified in writing this book, is we really don't have a lot of time. And am I going to be able to? I feel like that, you know, if you've ever seen the movie The Big Short, where it's like, you know, people are going to be calling me, you know, Mr. Doom and everything else. But here's my point. I've been in tech for 30 years. I've been in political activism. I've been in all this stuff. And is this what I would like to be doing? No, right? my default would be to be working on entrepreneurial ventures. My default would be to be starting companies, right? But I know this now, and I truly believe that this is going on. So I can't possibly spend time working on a startup if I know that the underlying monetary system is collapsing. So literally I can't do anything but this because literally as a CEO, if I'm starting a company, well, my big risk factor is I think the currency is going to collapse within 12 months. And if I'm running a business and I know the currency is going to collapse in 12 months, then I probably shouldn't be sitting here working on my marketing strategy for, widget X if the underlying thing is quicksand.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm wrong, but I would rather be wrong. But I don't think I'm wrong. And if I'm right, then I want to do everything that I can to get this message out to as many people as I can so that we can stop it. And for me, everything comes down to it's either centralization or decentralization. It's either determinism or free will, and it's either fear or love. To me, that's kind of like, that's not like just a campaign thing. That's actually how you can find tweets where I've been talking about that with respect to why I believe in decentralized proof of work cryptocurrencies, because I think that is what the actual battle is about at a fundamental level.
Yeah. So I know you said that you're not peddling any specific crypto, but I'm going to make you kind of do that a little bit because you talk a lot about Ravencoin, and I've pretty much only ever heard about it from you. So tell me, what is it and why is it different than some of the other major cryptos?
Well, and again, all of the cryptos. So and in the book, I just say you got to take out everything that's proof of stake, anything that did a fundraise, the SEC is going to shut it down. That's very clear. And if anybody's watching this week, that's going to happen. So I've used all of the cryptos, and I use all of the cryptos that I just mentioned. I use BCH more for day-to-day living off of crypto than any other cryptocurrency. What I like about Ravencoin is it's a fork of Bitcoin, but it allows you to tokenize anything and trade it without using smart contracts. So in other words, I can create a token, a unique token for, like, let's say I have a silver round, and I can sell you that silver round, which is tokenized, and transfer that token to you. And so you now have a proof of ownership on the blockchain that records that transaction. You can tokenize everything from stocks to houses to bonds, artwork. I mean, everything can be, the market for asset tokenization is larger than the market for actual currency itself. And I've been involved with Ravencoin since like the very early stage of it. I'm not involved in it. There's no corporate entity. There's no project. Like there are no people. It's an open source protocol, but I have bought silver. I bought wine. I bought artwork. And I've done peer-to-peer commerce, trading things on the Ravencoin blockchain for 4 or 5 years now. And there's a huge use case for that. So that's what makes it, it's not necessarily that Ravencoin is although it does, there's 1 minute blocks and as opposed to 10 minutes for a Bitcoin, and there are 2 megabyte block size. So it actually has more scalability even as money than BTC. And it is a fork of Bitcoin, but its primary use case wasn't to be used as money. It was to be able to tokenize any asset and trade it. And that use case is huge. There's a whole backstory behind how this came about. Do you know Patrick Byrne?
I know the name, but I'm spacing on why.
He is an interesting character. He's like this pro-liberty guy who was the founder and CEO of Overstock.com.
Okay.
And he's like he has a PhD in either political science or economics or something from Stanford. And he was the first major retailer to take Bitcoin. But he understood what the technology was used for, what blockchain technology could be used for above and beyond just cash. And he came up with this idea of a blockchain tech stack for human civilization, where you could use blockchain to, for instance, replace and fix capital markets. So Wall Street is completely corrupt. People don't realize that there's one company essentially called DTCC, which controls every stock certificate for every publicly traded corporation in America. So when you buy a stock, you don't actually get a physical possession of that stock certificate. This DTCC company moves it from one filing cabinet to another, like literally, which is why it takes 3 full days for stock trades to settle, right? And there's all kinds of fraud that goes on with the stock market because of this system, particularly around short selling, something called naked short selling, where people do shorts on shares that they don't even have in their physical possession. There's all kinds of shenanigans that go on. And Byrne had a track record and experience before doing overstock on Wall Street. And he's like, hey, you could bring blockchain into this and you could trade stocks on the blockchain, on this permanent ledger. You'd get rid of all the fraud.
Yep.
Well, it turns out Goldman Sachs and all these other guys, they make 2/3 of their net margin on that fraud, on things like naked short selling. So they're not necessarily really keen on this. But what Burns said in like 2017 was, I want to get out of the e-commerce business and go all into blockchain. So he started this thing called Medici, and Medici invested in all kinds of different blockchain companies that were part of this blockchain tech stack for human civilization. So in other words, you use blockchain to fix capital markets. You use blockchain to fix voting. You use blockchain to fix the supply chain. So he invested in a company called Grain Chain, which is a way, because I can see if you study how like the food supply works and how what it takes for a farmer to get a product to market and how all that is tracked. Like there's so much waste and inefficiency there. Put all that on the blockchain. So he invested in building and investing in this whole ecosystem of companies to basically handle disintermediating all of these functions of the economy. One of the big ones he did was land titling. Like you think about how ridiculous, when you buy a house, you have to go through a title transfer. There are all these intermediaries and lawyers involved in the process. But what if land was on the blockchain? You could just simply do a transaction. You could sell somebody, it wouldn't take 60 days to sell a house, right? So Medici land governance was one of the areas. And Ravencoin was one of the projects that he invested in it was an open source protocol, but he invested, just like as happens with Bitcoin, hired some developers and other things with the idea of maybe Ravencoin could be the chain that was used as the cornerstone of this blockchain tech stack for human civilization. So all of these other applications, voting could be on the blockchain. Well, you could use Ravencoin for that. What is your vote? It's a token, right? So you have a tokenized vote. So I got involved in Ravencoin because I believed in that vision of a blockchain tech stack for human civilization, that this could be a way to disintermediate and get rid of third parties in all of these major areas. Unfortunately, Byrne got, in my opinion, shoved out of his own company. And he's talked about stories with Russian spies, and there's a lot of intrigue and things that go on. And then he got involved with the election fiasco, and he's being sued by Dominion for claims about voter fraud and all this other stuff, which Patrick was funding some of the people that were doing some of the analysis of the ballots and everything else. But long story short, the Medici value proposition was basically hijacked, and all of that value was killed. But Ravencoin is still an open source protocol that can still do all of those things. It still has the ability to branch out into all of those areas, including stocks and everything else. And in fact, if you follow Bruce Fenton at all, Bruce was one of the co-authors of the white paper for Ravencoin, and Bruce and Tron Black were the two co-authors of the white paper, and the initial development and some of it was funded by Patrick Byrne. So this is a real cypherpunk ethos, and the project has stuck absolutely to the white paper. Like it hasn't veered at all, and it's a very high integrity project. There's been no like rug pulls, no deviation from the core mission, and it's a huge market opportunity. So that's why I like that project. And I think a lot of people were interested in it for tokenizing stock. And what we've found is that the SEC has not been very cooperative about the idea of allowing you to tokenize shares. Even if you want to follow their rules, they are not really open to allowing you to do that. And they put up so many barriers that turns out that's been a longer process than I think everybody wanted. But I still believe in the chain itself and what tokenization can mean for everything. So that's why I do like that project.
That's a really I mean, the fact that you're saying that it hasn't deviated from the white paper and, it's stuck on its mission, that's extremely encouraging. But just, your basic description of it as well, I think one of it baffles me that libertarians and independents and kind of this anti-establishment liberty movement group as a whole doesn't talk more about blockchains and cryptos, because they solve so many of the just ridiculous everyday normie, but like how do we build the roads type questions. Because I mean, one of them that I get fairly often is how do we have deeds and titles for houses and cars? Like that's a very common, it's not the first question I get, but a couple months into pulling somebody into the libertarian philosophy, that is a question I get from almost everyone at least once before they actually identify as a libertarian or an anarchist, is how do we do that? And thankfully the last couple years when I've been really active in the movement, there've been solid blockchains and the rise of NFTs as a concept and stuff like that, where we actually have an answer for that. But so many people just pivot to what we used to say before we actually had answers, which is basically your question isn't important. What's important is taking down this evil tyrannical state or whatever. And we'll get into the nitty gritty of it when we get there. Is such a dumb answer, and especially when we have an answer like tokenize it with Ravencoin. Boom. Answer. Like, we need to take these fears out of people's heads. We can't just tell them that their fears are illegitimate.
I actually spent some time contemplating and thinking about, well, what if you created a metaverse built on a blockchain tech stack for human civilization based on Ravencoin and ran it as kind of a simulation? I actually spent a little bit of time looking at that because this speaks to a lot one of your other points, which is, okay, all this collapses, then what? Right, because we are facing that, right? Yeah. We're facing, there's already a plan that we don't want, to the extent that you value freedom. What the alternative is I don't talk a lot about what the alternative is, but it's not because I don't think about it. It's because the emergency now is to stop this bad thing from happening. And certainly it's going to require a bunch of people sitting down from first principles and figuring out what a better solution is. So that's not something I would be doing on my own anyway. So, but nevertheless, there are some interesting ideas around that, and Ravencoin and this idea of tokenization. Like, it was really interesting to me. Like, the first thing that I bought on Ravencoin was a silver round, or somebody had these Ravencoin branded stamped silver rounds made in South Korea. So I actually made a purchase through Ravencoin. It cost like 1/100th of a cent to actually transfer the token. It took less than a minute. The guy sent me the thing in the mail from South Korea, and now I have a tokenized piece. So I conducted business with somebody on the other side of the world. There were no middlemen, and I've got an absolute transaction in an immutable ledger is that transaction and that token representing that piece of silver. To me, that's just cool to be able to do that. And I've done that with a whole variety of different things. And there was one point where the Federal Reserve went down a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2021. There was some technical hiccup. Banks weren't able to, send funds to one another. So I went online and I sent people 1 cent. I said, anybody send me a Ravencoin wallet, I'll send you 1 cent. And you might say, well, why would you do that? You can't send 1 cent using the United States financial system. You tell me how you can send a cent to South Korea, a cent to Brazil, 1 cent to somebody in the UK using the traditional banking system. So at one moment in time, while the Federal Reserve System of the United States was down, I sent people on like 7 different countries, probably 100 different people, 1 cent. Just because I could, just because I wanted to show that digital money can be better money, that can actually solve applications and do things that fiat actually can't even do at all. So yeah, no, there are so many things that can come out of a decentralized world. If you have a separation of money and state, and then you have a separation of other assets in state, using blockchain technology, it opens up infinite possibility. And I've met people all over the world just trading small things like art and wine and silver rounds through the Ravencoin community. It's just cool to be able to do that and find that there's a community of people that value freedom everywhere. In fact, everyone that this is a debate within the liberty community. There's some in the liberty community that think that most people don't want freedom and that it's only like 1% of people that actually want freedom. Most people want to be controlled. We just need to find that 1%. I think the opposite. I've done, in the last 5 years, I've done a lot of stuff that's more on personal transformation and like doing meditation and doing weird stuff that I would have never done. But there's a common theme to all of it. When people confront their own stuff, confront their own, whatever their limiting beliefs are, they realize that you really have unlimited potential. You can do whatever you want, and they want that freedom. It's just, it's whatever we're programmed with and whatever these limiting beliefs are that hold us back. But when anybody can tap into those unlimited beliefs, they welcome and appreciate freedom. And to me, that's what liberty is.
Hell yeah. Well, somehow we're already almost at 2 hours. That went by real fast. So before we wrap up, I want to give you a chance to tell people how they can find your campaign, your book, everything else, get involved, donate. Tell me.
Sure. Sure. You can find my campaign site at day2024.com. And the pitch that I want to make about the campaign is this. And if you've already listened for 2 hours, you already have a sense of what my campaign is about. This is about getting people to take control of their own lives. This is about radical noncompliance. This is about saying, we're kind of on the Titanic and our best way out is to get people to stop engaging with broken, corrupt systems. And the best way to do that, from my perspective, and the reason I'm running as a Republican, is to be able to get on the debate stage. To get on the debate stage, I need 40,000 individual donors. You can donate. You don't have to donate a lot of money. You can donate $1. And I need at least 200 donors in each state. And then I need to hit 1% in 3 national polls. That is doable. And if we do that, then everything that I'm talking about in terms of the bank run, the financial system, everything else is something that we can get on a national stage in front of 80 million people. So at day2024.com, you can donate in fiat, you can donate in crypto, the cryptos that I've talked about on here, Ravencoin, Bitcoin, BCH, BSV, Litecoin. I accept all of those. So that's the political campaign front. The book that I've written is The Final Countdown: Crypto, Gold, Silver, and the People's Last Stand Against Tyranny by Central Bank Digital Currencies. That's available on Amazon in Kindle form, paperback, and hardcover version as well. And the best way to reach me is on Twitter at Aaron R. Day.
All right. Yeah, guys, go and check out all of those things. Definitely go and follow him on Twitter because he has some of the best takes I've ever seen on there. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on. This was absolutely fantastic.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Y'all, if you haven't already, click all of the likes and the subscribe buttons, and again, go follow him on Twitter, go check out his campaign, give him a couple bucks, and go check out his book. All of those links are in the description. And then come on back next week. We're talking to Ed Mosier, who's actually a historian and tour guide in DC, and he gives liberty-minded tours about important people and places of liberty throughout DC. So a little bit of pro-liberty propaganda going on. And then no episode the following week. At least not from here, because we'll be at PorcFest, and I'm sure that there will actually be a bunch of episodes there. I just haven't actually confirmed any of them, so I can't tell you about any of them. But definitely come back next week, and until then, keep up the fight.
Wait.